From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the daily news brief on Telesur English. We begin this new edition right now. We begin in the Dominican Republic, where talks are underway again between the Venezuelan government and the opposition. Delegations from both sides arrived for the dialogue at the Foreign Ministry in Santo Domingo. The meeting is being hosted by the Dominican President Danilo Medina. Foreign ministers from Chile, Mexico, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines are all taking part to facilitate the attempt to agree a political solution in Venezuela. Our correspondent Madeleine Garcia is in Santo Domingo and has more.
Venezuela's government and the opposition are meeting in the Dominican Republic. They are meeting at the country's Chancellery building to discuss 6 concrete topics that were defined during the December 1st meetings. One of them relates to creating a commission to investigate the deaths of more than 160 people between 2014 and 2017. They will also discuss the economic guarantees, as Venezuela's government is demanding that the opposition supports the end of the economic sanctions imposed by the United States, measures that the opposition promoted. They will also debate the political guarantees, since Venezuela is holding its presidential elections next year, as well as an acknowledgement of the Constituent Assembly. Also on the table, the debate about the balance of power between the different political institutions. And finally, the debate around the social and economic situation in Venezuela. Delegates from many other countries are also present during these peace talks, including Mexico, Chile, Bolivia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as Nicaragua. We'll keep you updated with more.
Thank you. Now, our correspondent in Caracas, Freddie Gillingham, is also following the talks and sent us this report.
So the rescheduled dialogue between the Venezuelan government and the opposition resumed today in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. This is, of course, a continuation of talks which were rescheduled earlier this month. There has been several stalled attempts to get these talks going, but they did commence today in the Dominican Republic. The foreign ministers of Bolivia, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Chile were all present. The Venezuelan foreign minister, Jorge Arreaza, did release a statement yesterday urging for the success of these talks, where he said, I quote, "Hopefully we can guarantee in this space a coexistent agreement where a law is respected and where political violence is out of the game." This is, of course, hinting at the anti-government protests which engulfed the country throughout the summer. Some of the main points on the agenda today regarding the demands of the government, which they will be putting forward, is the setting up of a truth commission. This will be to establish an investigative approach to political orchestrated crimes in the country. The respect of the electoral process. This, of course, comes after the municipal elections, where the opposition, 3 of the main opposition parties boycotted that vote, and finally the recognition of the Constituent Assembly. That's all we have time for now. We will update you later on the findings of those demands in the Dominican Republic.
That was Frederick Gillingham from Caracas. Now, Cuba has expressed once again its support towards Venezuela and its president, Nicolás Maduro, this time during the ALBA Council closing ceremony. The 11 nation members of ALBA rejected the sanctions imposed against the Bolivarian country by the United States, the European Union, and Canada. President Maduro and his Cuban counterpart, Raúl Castro, attended the event, one that also commemorated the organization's 13th anniversary that has worked as a mechanism to integrate Latin America.
We renew our firm support for the Bolivarian Revolution, its civilian military union, and its government led by the constitutional president Nicolás Maduro. We celebrate with joy the victory of democracy in Venezuela, based on the results of the regional and municipal elections recently held and the creation of the National Constituent Assembly, which has defeated the imperial strategy of violence to plunge Venezuela into chaos and overthrow the Bolivarian Revolution.
The main opposition Libre Party in Honduras has called its supporters onto the streets to protest at fraud at last month's elections. The protesters blocked roads and burned tires in the capital, Tegucigalpa, and in other cities like San Pedro Sula. They want to remove President Juan Orlando Hernandez and a complete recount of all the ballot boxes.
We are protesting against fraud. We want them to count all the votes in the ballot boxes. This is what we want, and the people want. We've already won the elections. Now we want them to recount the votes that show that. But we don't want it done by Matamoros, the head of the TSE. He works for ULOB.
Now let's go live to Tegucigalpa and our correspondent Heather Geese. Hello Heather, what is the scene right now over there? What can you tell us?
So today a national strike was called, and these are not centralized mobilizations or marches like we've seen on other occasions. Instead, these are decentralized actions on made roads in certain neighborhoods. So the Opposition Alliance is reporting that protesters are participating in this national strike in every department of the country. There are dozens of road blockades and other occupations set up. Here in the capital, Tegucigalpa, there have been throughout the morning over 15 blockades from reports I've seen. A number of these were broken up early in the morning, but the main ones, which are at the exit and entry points of the city on the main roads leading to other cities, those are still being maintained by protesters. There are also some reports of repression from police and military forces. Some of the blockades have been removed with tear gas and a crackdown involving protesters being beaten. And in other places, the repression has been much more forceful. There are reports from certain areas in the northern part of the country where security forces actually used live bullets on protesters. Specifically, one case in a city called Villanueva in the department of Cortés. This is one of the strongholds of the alliance where Salvador Nasrallah won the vote. In Villanueva, there are reports that there are 6 people injured after security forces opened fire with live bullets. So there are a number of protests still going on. These are decentralized protests all across the country, but we're seeing that the police and military repression is also cracking down.
So Heather, can you tell us if there's any possibility that the opposition will actually get the recount that they're demanding?
At this point, it's looking difficult. The Supreme Electoral Tribunal conducted a partial recount of the vote of just over 4,700 ballot boxes, which is just over 1/4 of the more than 18,000 ballot boxes that the Opposition Alliance say should be recounted. But the sense is that the Supreme Electoral Tribunal is using that to say they've conducted their recount and will likely move ahead to announce President Juan Orlando Hernandez as president. We don't have official news yet, but one Honduran newspaper is reporting that the Supreme Electoral Tribunal is going to reject the 4 official challenges to the results at the presidential level. That statement hasn't been made official yet, but this newspaper is reporting sources that say that that is going to happen. So those 4 challenges, 2 came from citizens, and the other 2, one was from the Liberal Party calling for the entire election to be nullified and new elections to be called, and the other came from the Opposition Alliance calling for the vote counting process to be nullified, which would lead them to be able to push for their demand, which, as you played in your clip of former President Manuel Zelaya, is for a complete recount of the vote from the more than 18,000 ballot boxes. So we're hearing that those official challenges are going to be rejected, which is not surprising to the people who filed them, but it's just one more kind of barrier to being able to achieve this recount that they're calling for, which it's looking like is going to be very difficult to achieve.
And do we know if the opposition has sought, for example, international organizations like the OAS for this demand?
So statements from the OAS have been very important in this process. The Organization of American States Election Observation Mission, as well as the European Union Election Observation Mission, did come out and say that there were a multitude of irregularities in this electoral process, which led them to not have complete faith in the results that were coming out. So that was very important in order to start to put pressure on the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. More recently, the Opposition Alliance delivered all of the copies it has of the tally sheets. All of the parties have copies of the tally sheets from every ballot box. It delivered those tally sheets to the Organization of American States and the European Union in hopes that there could be a comparison between the Opposition Alliance's tally sheets and the tally sheets of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, thinking that if all of the parties compare their tally sheets, they'll be able to see where there are discrepancies between them. Now, the Organization of American States and the European Union haven't moved on any action with those tally sheets, so we'll still have to see if there's further pressure from those international organizations that have been leading observation missions during this election, and whether they'll be putting more pressure on the Supreme Electoral Tribunal to take those steps.
Thank you very much, Heather. We'll be sure to follow up any updates from Tegucigalpa. Now we'll be back very soon. Stay with us. The Argentine government is preparing a decree to pass its pension reform after the Congress had to suspend its debate on the law because of protests and violent repression outside. More details in the next report.
Workers from across the country mobilized in Buenos Aires to try and stop the pension reform law. The march arrived outside of Congress, which was guarded by a strong security presence. About 3,500 state security forces violently repressed the social protest, creating chaos and confusion among the Congress representatives.
We never expected such violent repression. We demand the security operation be stopped so that we can continue with today's session in peace. That's all we want.
We have a militarized Congress. It reminds us of last year's events, which are very sad for our history.
During the protest, hundreds of retired citizens accused the government to take adjustment measures only to generate more hunger and poverty.
How is it possible that they're going to take $5 billion from pensioners' pockets? This is a huge robbery. They're harming poor people because now they're going to make you retire at the age of 80.
Numerous protesters were injured by tear gas and rubber bullets. However, this didn't stop them to stand against the new regulation policies and social rights violations established by President Mauricio Macri.
A militarized Congress. It is an atrocious image. This violent repression against pensioners and workers who have marched outside Congress is like kidnapping our democracy. It's a message to the people that every time they want to raise their voices, there will be rubber bullets and tear gas.
The Congress session to debate the pension reform law has failed. The next couple of days will be difficult for the Argentine people. Labor unions reject these reforms, which try to deepen the neoliberal economic and social models. Workers announced that they will be protesting on the streets to protect their achievements obtained over the last couple of years.
The Argentine indigenous leader and lawmaker Milagro Sala is being transferred back to a form of house arrest. Sala is suspected to be taken from prison to the house at El Carmen, where she was previously under house arrest. Restrictions will be placed on the visits she can receive. The Tupac Amaru leader has already been absolved in the cases against her, and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has ruled that she should be released by today. Our correspondent in Jujuy, Sabrina Roth, has more in this report.
Saludos en estudio, saludos a toda la audiencia de Telesur.
The Inter-American Court of Human Rights deadline to liberate Milagro Sala is today. This comes after provisional measures given by the court on November 23rd, which determined house arrest for Sala, or less restrictive regulations such as the use of an electronic ankle bracelet or passport cancellation. The court's resolution has been clear and direct, without any kind of legal misinterpretation. This didn't happen with the past Inter-American Commission resolution, where 2 judges didn't guarantee proper security measures for her. This time, Milagros Sala will be protected as the Supreme Court and Inter-American Court have established.
That was Sabrina Roth from Argentina. On Thursday, it marked the Victory's Day for social movements in Brazil, with a defeat for President Michel Temer. A key debate on his proposed pension reforms, due to be voted next week, has been postponed until February 2018. More details in the next report from our correspondents André Vieira and Sebastián Soto.
Without any discussion in Parliament and with a lot of popular pressure, the vote for the reform of the pension system proposed by the government of Michel Temer was postponed until February. On early Thursday, social movements called for a press conference in Rio de Janeiro to denounce the consequences of Temer's policies and to express solidarity with the 10 people on hunger strike because of the reforms. In light of the postponed vote, the 10-day hunger strike has been stopped for now.
It's very bad. Very few people get to retire. This is one of the cruelest reforms from the coup government of Michel Temer. There was recently the labor reform, but this one is the worst, without a doubt.
Worker Marcos, like all men, can only retire at 65 years old. Currently, they need to contribute for 35 years and there's no minimum age to access this benefit.
Until we reach that age, we don't know if we're going to be alive or receiving some money. We don't know what to do with our lives.
Michel Temer's policies also affects women. Senalba is 47 years old and she could retire in 8 years given her 22-year contribution to Social Security. With this new regulation, she will have to work 16 more years because today women need to contribute for 30 years and there's no minimum age. With Temer's reform, women will have to work until 62 to be able to retire.
He doesn't want to retire at that age and pretends to do the same with the population, to kill the populations as slaves, because we will work and never retire.
The situation is a concern for those close to retirement, but it's even worse for young people because the country is currently in financial and political crisis in which expectations of employment are very low, with over 13 million workers unemployed.
The government doesn't have legitimacy to do this, and that's why they're pushing hard for these pension reforms. Middle education, free transportation. They're running to ruin everything until next year.
With only 3% of approval of his government and facing strong rejection from the population, Michel Temer won't be able to approve his pension reforms. For next year, social movements have promised to resist and they warn that they will not allow this neoliberal policy to go through.
A year and a half after being elected, Peru's President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski is facing corruption allegations that are putting his job at risk. The opposition party, Fuerza Popular, that controls the Congress, has demanded the president resign after he was linked to the Odebrecht case. Otherwise, they say they will initiate an impeachment process against him. Kuczynski said that he will meet with the parliamentary commission in charge of investigating the allegations.
I'm here to face the allegations. I will not run. I will not hide, nor do I have reason to do so. I'm here because you all deserve an explanation, and I have an obligation to give it.
Chile's presidential runoff election on Sunday is likely to be decided by a small margin. Both the presidential candidates, Sebastián Piñera and Alejandro Guillier, have closed their campaigns. Chile's billionaire conservative candidate, Sebastián Piñera, a former president himself, heads into a tighter-than-expected race with center-left senator and journalist Alejandro Guillier. Both the candidates entered their campaigns by promising the voters better governance.
I apologize to my compatriots for the errors that we have, without a doubt, committed, and I feel that today we have a better program, better teams, a clearer mission, and we are better prepared.
I've got a dream for the country that I shared with you. I want a Chile without abuse nor collusion. I want a Chile where everybody's rights are respected, where the diverse Chilean families can fully develop, where the children are happy, while the elderly have decent pensions.
5 children in Colombia died due to lack of food and social welfare in the area of Guajira. This is a humanitarian crisis that affects the lives of thousands of people who live in that department located in the north. 16 children from the YU indigenous community died due to hunger and medical attention in the region in 2017. The doctors in the area have denounced this situation on multiple occasions and have requested that the Colombian government finds a solution to avoid the loss of innocent lives. Colombia's health deputy minister said the direct cause of death wasn't chronic malnutrition. But the citizens of Guajira say corruption, the money they're not receiving for mineral exploitation in the area, and the lack of political will by the state are among the structural causes of this crisis. Venezuela's humanized childbirth plan was launched earlier this year. It's an initiative that aims to support women through their entire pregnancy and childbirth, help combat obstetric violence, and cut down maternal mortality rates. Our correspondent in Caracas, Freddie Gillingham, went along to see how the program was doing.
Tucked up on the 4th floor of a public maternity hospital in western Caracas, a group of women sit side by side, reflecting on their personal experiences of pregnancy. A community leader leads the session. She is one of hundreds of newly trained midwives. Training these community midwives is a central pillar of this program, and becoming one is a role everyone must play.
Childbirth has been far too medicalized, and there has been too much fear for generations, so we think it's painful and awful. We have heard just about experiences, so we think that a cesarean is the solution, that it's easier and less painful, among other myths. But what we want to do through this program is firstly make sure that women don't feel alone, because women have been isolated. The medical system doesn't explain to us what is happening, what they are doing to us and why. So in this program of humanized childbirth, we want to give women the knowledge and tools so that we know our rights. Rights that sometimes we know, but we don't know how to exercise them.
In 2011, Venezuela became the first nation in the world to recognize obstetric violence as a legal category and a punishable offense. Caesarean rates in some private clinics are as high as 90%. To counter this, the humanized birth plan concentrates on participation, incorporation and empowerment to let women take back control of how they want their pregnancy to be.
I think the Humanized Childbirth project is very important, not just for pregnant women, but for all women, because it makes us closer to this process because, often pregnancy doesn't have a high priority. And with this humanized childbirth, we are more connected to childbirth.
The initiative was launched as a result of pressure from various women's organizations across the country. Shelters for pregnant women living in extreme poverty and community outreach are all part of the program. It seeks to move childbirth away from the medicalization that dominates the private healthcare market and put it back in the hands of the community, who can all have a say, one at a time. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, Caracas.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Israeli forces have shot dead 4 Palestinians and wounded 160 more with live fire to repress protests across Palestine in reaction to Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Of those killed, 2 men were protesting at the border in the Gaza Strip and 2 in the West Bank, including 29-year-old Ibrahim Abu Turaye, who has already lost both of his legs. Tens of thousands of people have joined fresh protests in the second Friday of rage since the Trump declaration. Our correspondent in Palestine, Sergio Rodrigo, tells us more about what is happening on the ground.
The Israeli military continues to repress the protests taking place in Palestine. Several have been injured a week after the Friday of Rage took place last week, the third intifada, supported by a great number of Palestinians, that have taken to the streets to reject the United States President Donald Trump's announcement to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Protesters insist that this decision breaks the Oslo agreements and are demanding the end of the Israeli occupation. They say they are protesting for a solution that will respect their right to self-determination while they continue to endure the atrocities committed by the Israeli militia.
That was Sergio Rodrigo from Gaza. Now let's take a look at our World News Roundup.
A Russian court has sentenced ex-economy minister Alexei Ulukayev to 8 years in prison after finding him guilty of taking a $2 million bribe from Igor Sechin, the CEO of oil giant Rosneft. The court also ruled that Ulukayev must pay a fine of more than $2 million. Ulukayev is the highest-ranking official arrested in Putin's 17 years in power. The leaders of the EU have agreed to move Brexit talks onto the second phase after meeting in Brussels. Talks will now move on to the long-term relationship between the UK and the EU, focusing on a transition period and a trading relationship for the future.
And we'll talk about moving on from phase 1 to phase 2, talking about the transition period and the new relationship that will exist between the EU and the UK. I think a lot of thinking needs to be done about that. There does seem to be quite divergent opinions on what that should look like. Needless to say, from an Irish point of view, we'd like it to look as much like the current relationship as possible, but that wouldn't necessarily be the view of everyone.
An election in Catalonia will fail to conclusively resolve a political crisis over an independence drive in the region. This is according to the final polls before the December 21st vote. Former Catalan leader Charles Puigdemont is campaigning from Brussels, where he moved shortly after he was fired by Madrid, following a unilateral declaration of independence by the region. A second batch of refugees who had been evacuated from Libya by the United Nations UNHCR refugee agency have arrived in Nigeria as part of efforts to resettle asylum seekers whose requests have been examined directly in Africa. The move fits into a United Nations strategy to provide protection for refugees and other vulnerable migrants who attempt to travel to Libya, often intending to make the dangerous sea crossing to Italy. The Tivoli amusement park in central Copenhagen, Denmark, has been dressed up for Christmas with 1 million lights and festive decorations. Visitors can now see a single tree covered in over 36,000 fairy lights. Rides and buildings have also been covered in lights. Christmas at Tivoli opened on November 18th and will run until December 31st.
And we've come to the end of this daily news brief. This and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.